The stale air of the casino, thick with cheap perfume and desperation, was my entire world. It clung to my uniform, a ridiculous red vest over a white shirt that was never quite white enough. At 21, I wasn't just a casino attendant. I was a ghost, floating between the flashing lights of the slot machines and the tense silence of the high-stakes tables, completely invisible until someone needed a drink or to cash out their meager winnings. Tonight, however, I was anything but invisible. Dante found me by the roulette wheel, his shadow falling over me like a bad omen. He wasn't supposed to be here. A restraining order was just a piece of paper to a man like him, a suggestion he found amusing. His voice, a low growl that used to sound like protection, was now just a threat. "Chloe, what are you doing? You think you can just ignore my calls forever?" he murmured, his fingers gripping my arm just a little too tightly. The patrons nearby pretended not to notice, their eyes glued to the spinning wheel, but I could feel their peripheral pity. It burned more than Dante's grip. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trying to escape its cage. My manager was nowhere in sight. Security was a joke. I was on my own. My eyes darted around, searching for an escape, for anyone, anything. That's when I saw him. He was sitting at a private baccarat table, a space usually reserved for the kind of money that could buy and sell this entire building. He wore a long, dark gray coat that seemed to absorb the garish light of the casino, leaving him in his own pocket of shadow and calm. He was Korean, with sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing, and a face so perfectly composed it looked like it was carved from stone. He held his cards with an unnerving stillness, his whole being radiating a quiet, lethal authority that made the air around him feel cold. Dante followed my gaze, scoffing. "What, you think some rich tourist is gonna save you?" He tightened his grip, pulling me closer. "You're mine, Chloe." You seem to forget that panic, raw and blinding, clawed its way at my throat. I had no plan, no strategy. All I had was a single, wild, suicidal impulse. I wrenched my arm free, the sudden movement shocking Dante into a moment's hesitation. It was all the time I needed. I stumbled, half ran, towards the baccarat table, my cheap work shoes slipping on the polished marble. I stopped beside the cold man's chair, my breath coming in ragged sobs. He didn't look up, his attention fixed on the cards. Dante was coming up behind me, his footsteps heavy and angry. It was now or never. I leaned down, my voice a broken whisper against the shell of the stranger's ear, the words tumbling out of me on a wave of pure terror. "Please," I begged, my hands trembling. "Act like you love me, please." The man at the table didn't flinch. His eyes, dark and unreadable, finally lifted from his cards and met mine. For a heartbeat, there was nothing. No pity, no kindness, not even curiosity. Just a flat, chilling assessment, as if he were calculating the odds of a hand I hadn't even played yet. He looked past me, his gaze landing on Dante, who had frozen a few feet away, caught between rage and uncertainty. The man's expression didn't change, but a subtle shift in the air told me a decision had been made. He didn't speak a word to me. Instead, he placed his cards face down on the green felt with deliberate slowness, the gesture of final, silent dismissal of the game. Then, his arm, impossibly fast, snaked around my waist, pulling me down onto his lap. The move was so sudden and possessive it knocked the air from my lungs. I landed with a soft gasp, my body rigid with shock. His hand rested on my hip, his thumb stroking the fabric of my cheap vest in a gesture that was anything but comforting. It was a claim, an act of ownership. The entire high-limit area, which had been humming with a low murmur, fell utterly silent. Every eye was on us. Dante stood there, his mouth slightly agape, his fists clenched at his sides. The sheer audacity of the act had stunned him. "Hey," he finally stammered, taking a half-step forward. "What do you think you're doing?" "That's my girl," the man I was sitting on finally spoke, his voice a low, gravelly baritone that vibrated through my entire body. He didn't look at Dante. His eyes were fixed on me. "Are you his girl?" he asked. The question was soft, but it held the weight of a death sentence. I could only shake my head, a tiny, jerky movement. A small, humorless smile touched his lips. He then turned his head, just enough to pin Dante with a look of such profound dismissal that I felt the shame of it on his behalf. "You hurt her," he said. "Leave." It wasn't a suggestion. It was a command that echoed with unspoken consequences. Dante's face cycled through disbelief, fury, and then, finally, a flicker of genuine fear. He looked at the man, truly looked at him, and whatever he saw there made him take a step back. "This isn't over," he snarled, but the threat was hollow. He turned and stalked away, swallowed by the noise and lights of the casino floor. The man's hand was still on my hip. He hadn't let go. "Stay," he commanded softly, his breath warm against my ear. The danger from Dante had passed, but I had the terrifying premonition that I had just traded a simple monster for something far more complex and infinitely more dangerous. He didn't move until the dealer, with a nervous cough, had cleared the table and a respectful quiet had settled back over the area. His hand never left my waist, a constant, heavy reminder of the bargain I had blindly struck. When he finally stood, he pulled me up with him, his grip firm on my arm. He led me away from the tables, not towards the main exit, but towards a private elevator I never even knew existed, tucked away behind a velvet rope. Two men in dark, impeccably tailored suits materialized from the shadows, falling into step behind us. They didn't look like casino security, they looked like soldiers. My heart, which had just begun to slow, started pounding all over again. The elevator ride was silent and swift, ascending to the penthouse levels. The doors opened directly into a suite that was larger than my entire apartment building. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed a glittering panorama of the city, a view reserved for gods and kings. He let go of my arm and walked towards the vast windows, his back to me. "You were convincing," he stated, his voice flat. The desperation was authentic. I stood frozen by the door, clutching my hands together. The two men who had followed us remained outside in the hallway, their presence a silent, formidable barrier. "Thank you," I whispered, the words feeling small and absurd in the cavernous room. "I'm sorry to have bothered you," he turned around slowly. He had taken off his gray coat, revealing a crisp white collared shirt and a perfectly tailored black suit that screamed money and power. He wasn't a doctor on vacation. He was something else entirely. "You misunderstand," he said, his eyes narrowing slightly. "I am not in the business of charity. You asked for my help. You used me to solve your problem. Now, there is a price." A cold dread washed over me. Of course. A man like this did nothing for free. "I don't have any money," I said, my voice shaking. A dry, humorless chuckle escaped his lips. "I have no need for your money, little bird." He walked towards me, his steps measured and silent. He stopped just in front of me, forcing me to tilt my head back to meet his gaze. "My name is Minjun, and you made a scene with me in a very public place. In my world, appearances are everything. You have created a story, and now you will help me finish it." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "Your ex-boyfriend is a minor annoyance I will have taken care of. You will not see him again. In return, you will continue this performance. To the world, you are with me now. You will live where I say, do as I say, and wear what I provide. There is one rule that you will never break. You are mine in public. You do not question me, you do not embarrass me, and you show me nothing but adoration. Is that clear?" He wasn't asking. He was telling. This wasn't a deal, it was a declaration of terms. He was a mafia boss. It was the only explanation that made sense, the deference from the staff, the armed men, the chilling authority. I had run from a street-level thug and thrown myself at the mercy of a kingpin. "And if I say no?" I asked, my voice barely audible. Minjun's expression remained unchanged, but his eyes grew colder. "Then I will walk you back down to the casino floor and leave you there. And I will make sure no one ever helps you again." The next week was a blur of disorientation and re-education. I was moved from my cramped, run-down apartment into a penthouse suite that felt like a museum. It was beautiful, sterile, and suffocating. My old life was erased with brutal efficiency. A woman with a severe haircut and a clipboard appeared the first morning, cataloging my meager possessions before they were packed away and disposed of. My cheap clothes were replaced with a wardrobe of designer labels, fabrics I was afraid to touch, and shoes that made me feel like I was walking on stilts. My days were structured with lessons. I wasn't taught things, they were drilled into me. Etiquette, posture, how to walk, how to sit, how to eat. A stern woman taught me how to descend a staircase, as if I belonged at the bottom of it. A man with cold eyes spent hours showing me security photographs, forcing me to memorize the faces of Minjun's rivals, associates, and enemies. "This man will smile at you while his soldiers wait in the car," he'd say, tapping a photo. "This family will offer you wine that is poisoned." It was a transformation, but it felt more like being forged into a weapon. Minjun was a distant but constant presence. He was the architect of my new reality, a harsh, demanding teacher. He'd appear without warning, his gaze sweeping over me with critical assessment. "Your shoulders are tense," he'd say, his fingers pressing between my shoulder blades, the touch both corrective and shockingly intimate. "Fear looks like weakness." "You are not weak." Another time, as I struggled with a formal play setting, he came up behind me, his hand covering mine as he guided my fork. "They will watch everything you do," he whispered, his voice a low rumble against my ear. "They will be looking for a crack in your performance. Do not give them 1 inch." There was no kindness in his instruction, only a relentless focus on survival. Yet, in those moments of forced proximity, a strange connection began to form. I started to see the man beneath the mafia boss persona. I saw the immense pressure he was under in the tight line of his jaw, the exhaustion in the rare moments he thought no one was watching. He was building me into a shield, and I was beginning to feel the weight of what he was trying to protect. He was teaching me to survive in his world, a world of gilded cages and silent, deadly threats. The lessons were harsh, but the unspoken message was clear. My survival was now linked to his. And for reasons I couldn't yet understand, he seemed determined to ensure I didn't fail. The night of the Meridian Foundation Gala was my final exam. It was a high society charity event crawling with the city's elite, a glittering snake pit of old money and new power. Minjun had informed me that morning, his tone leaving no room for discussion. "Dante will be there," he'd said, watching my reaction. "He works security for the catering company. It is the perfect stage to solidify our story." My blood ran cold, but I remembered my training. I met his gaze and nodded, a mask of calm composure settling over my features. "I understand," I said, and I saw a flicker of something, approval, perhaps, in his dark eyes. I was dressed in a gown of deep emerald silk that clung to my body like a second skin. Diamonds glittered at my throat and ears, cold and heavy. When I descended the stairs of the penthouse to meet him, Minjun was waiting, dressed in a black tuxedo that was the sartorial equivalent of a panther. He looked devastatingly handsome and utterly lethal. His eyes swept over me, a slow, appreciative appraisal that made my skin tingle. "Acceptable," he murmured, though his eyes said more. He held out his arm, and I placed my hand on his forearm, the gesture now practiced and smooth. The moment we stepped out of the car at the gala, I felt the shift. The air crackled with his presence. People didn't just look at him. They watched him, their expressions a mixture of fear, respect, and hungry curiosity. Whispers followed us as we moved through the ballroom. "That's Minjun Kim," I heard someone breathe. The head of the Daehyun Group. It was a corporate-sounding name for what I knew was a powerful Korean mafia family. He was more than just a boss. He was royalty in his world. He guided me through the crowd, his hand a warm, possessive weight on the small of my back. He introduced me simply as my partner, Chloe, and the way he said it left no room for questions. Then I saw him. Dante was standing by a service entrance, his catering uniform ill-fitting and stained. Our eyes met across the glittering ballroom. A sneer twisted his lips, and he started to move towards us, his body language radiating the old, familiar aggression. My heart gave a painful lurch, but I felt Minjun's hand press gently against my back, a silent command. Do not flinch. I turned my face up towards Minjun, my expression shifting into one of pure adoration. I laughed at something he hadn't said, my fingers tracing a line on his lapel. I made myself the picture of a woman completely captivated by the man beside her, a woman who couldn't possibly notice a lowly catering grunt across the room. The public snub was more powerful than any confrontation. Dante stopped dead in his tracks, his face burning with a humiliation so profound I could feel it from 50 feet away. Minjun leaned down, his lips brushing my ear. "Well done, little bird," he whispered. I had passed my test. After the gala, the victory felt hollow. We returned to the silent penthouse, the adrenaline leaving me shaky and cold. The illusion of the night dissolved, leaving only the stark reality of our arrangement. A few nights later, the true complexity of Minjun's world revealed itself. 3 older Korean men arrived unannounced. They were dressed in traditional, expensive clothing that seemed out of place in the modern penthouse. They carried themselves with an ancient, unyielding authority that made even Minjun seem deferential. They were the elders, the board of directors for his criminal empire. They sat in the living area while I was instructed to serve them tea. It was another test, I knew. They spoke in rapid, formal Korean, their sharp, assessing eyes periodically flicking to me. I couldn't understand their words, but I understood the dynamic. They were scrutinizing me, judging me, looking for the flaw in Minjun's choice. I moved with the grace and silence I had been taught, my hands steady as I poured the tea, my gaze respectfully lowered. I was a ghost again, but this time it was a calculated performance. After an hour of tense discussion, they left as silently as they had arrived. The air in the room remained heavy. Minjun stood by the window for a long time, staring down at the city lights. "They do not approve," he said finally, without turning around. "They see you as a weakness, an outsider, a liability." My chest tightened. "I'm sorry, do not be," he said, turning to face me. His expression was weary. Their disapproval was expected. "It is why I needed you." He walked over to the bar and poured 2 glasses of whiskey, handing one to me. "My father's death left a vacuum. There are factions within the family, cousins and uncles who believe they have a better claim to leadership. They want to forge alliances through marriage, to bind the organization to other families. They see it as strength." He took a sip of his drink. "I see it as a cage. By bringing you in, a complete unknown, with no ties to our world, I have disrupted their plans. I appear independent, unallied. It makes me unpredictable." He looked at me then, his eyes holding a new depth. "I chose you in that casino not because you were beautiful, but because you were desperate. I believed a desperate person would be controllable, malleable." The cold, calculated truth of it stung, but it was also the most honest thing he had ever said to me. I was not a romantic partner. I was a strategic move in a silent, deadly war for succession. A pawn he had plucked from obscurity to shield his king. The feeling of being a pawn became terrifyingly real a week later. Minjun was away at a meeting he'd only described as unavoidable. I had used the rare moment of freedom to walk in the private garden on the rooftop of the building, a lush, green oasis in the sky. I thought I was alone. "Beautiful view, isn't it?" The voice was friendly, casual, and it made every muscle in my body lock up. I turned to see a man in a rumpled suit leaning against a planter. He had a tired, easy smile, but his eyes were sharp, missing nothing. "I'm Detective Harding," he said, holding up a badge. "Mind if I have a word?" He didn't wait for an answer, stepping closer. "Chloe, right? I know you're in a difficult situation." My mind raced. How did he get up here? The security was absolute. "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, my voice tight. Harding's smile didn't waver. "Let's not play games. We both know who Minjun Kim is. He's not a legitimate businessman. He's the leader of a violent criminal organization, a powerful mafia boss. We've been trying to build a case against him for years." He paused, his expression turning sympathetic. "I know about your ex, Dante. I know how you met Minjun. You were scared. You did what you had to do to survive. But this isn't a life for you." He leaned in, his voice dropping. "Help me, Chloe. Give me something on his operations, something we can use. In return, I can offer you a way out. Full immunity, witness protection. A new life. Far away from all of this, the offer hung in the air, a tempting poison. A clean slate. A way back to being normal. Before I could even process it, he delivered the final blow. Your ex, Dante, is in custody on an assault charge. He's trying to save his own skin. He's telling my colleagues that you're a willing participant in Kim's organization. That you're not a victim, you're a conspirator. Without my help, you're going to go down with him. The world tilted. I was trapped. It was a choice between two prisons, one made of steel bars, the other a gilded cage. Harding handed me a burner phone. You have 24 hours to decide, he said, his friendly mask firmly back in place. Make the right choice. He walked away, leaving me alone in the garden, the setting sun casting long, dark shadows that looked like bars closing in around me. That night, the penthouse felt less like a sanctuary and more like the epicenter of a storm. I held the burner phone in my hand, its weight a physical representation of the impossible choice I faced. Trust the detective who offered a clean escape that felt like a trap? Or remain loyal to the mafia boss who had protected me but owned me? Every instinct screamed that Harding's offer was too clean, too simple for a world this complicated. Min-jun had kept his word. He had shielded me, trained me, and in his own cold way, ensured my survival. A strange, unwilling loyalty had taken root in me. When he returned late that night, he found me sitting in the dark, the phone on the table in front of me. I didn't try to hide it. I told him everything. About Harding, the offer of witness protection, and the threat about Dante. I watched his face, expecting an explosion of rage, a cold accusation. Instead, his expression hardened into something far more dangerous, a quiet, chilling fury. But it wasn't directed at me. He gave you this phone? Min-jun asked, his voice dangerously low. I nodded. He picked it up, turning it over in his hands before snapping it in half with a single, sharp crack. There is no Detective Harding in that division, he said, his eyes like chips of ice. He works for the Kuznetsov family, our Russian rivals. They've been trying to gain leverage on me for months. The blood drained from my face. The friendly detective, the offer of a new life. It was all a lie. A sophisticated trap designed to lure me away, to kidnap me. And Dante? I whispered, dreading the answer.
Minun ist reizend.
Dante was never just a jealous ex. He was a low-level nobody who worked for them. His harassment was not random. It was a calculated strategy. They knew his history with you. They instructed him to push you, to make you feel so cornered, so desperate, that you would run into the arms of the first powerful man who offered you protection. They were gambling it would be me. The floor seemed to fall away beneath me. It wasn't just my deal with Min-jun that was a performance. My entire rescue was a sham. I was a pawn from the very beginning, moved into place by his enemies. My desperation, my fear, my plea in the casino, it had all been part of their script. Dante had driven me into the cage, and Harding was meant to be the one who carried it away. I felt a wave of nausea. I had been used by everyone, manipulated from every possible angle. Min-jun watched the storm of emotions on my face. They underestimated you, he said, his voice softening almost imperceptibly. They assumed you would be a frightened little girl who would jump at the first chance to run. They didn't expect you to tell me. A cold, hard fury began to replace the nausea and fear. It was an anger unlike anything I had ever felt before. I had been a victim. I had been a pawn. I had been a performer. Now, I wanted to be a player. I looked up at Min-jun, my resolve hardening into steel. They want to use me as a weapon against you, I said, my voice steady and clear. So, let's use me as a weapon against them. Min-jun raised an eyebrow, a flicker of surprise in his cold eyes. What are you suggesting? He asked. I'll take the meeting, I said, the words tasting like metal in my mouth. I'll call their bluff. I will agree to cooperate with Detective Harding. I'll tell him I have information he wants, something valuable enough that he'll have to meet me to get it. I'll be the bait, and you'll be the trap. A slow, dangerous smile spread across Min-jun's face. It was the first genuine smile I had ever seen from him, and it was terrifying. The risk is substantial, he warned. If they sense anything, they will not hesitate. They think I'm a scared girl, I countered. I'll be the scared girl they expect. It's the one role I know how to play perfectly. The plan was set with chilling efficiency. I used a public phone to contact Harding, my voice trembling with practiced fear. I told him I was in, that Minjun was storing sensitive financial records in an old warehouse downtown before moving them, and that I could get him access. The bait was taken. The meeting was set for the following night. The warehouse was a cavern of rust and shadows, smelling of decay and stagnant water. I stood in a small pool of light from a single bare bulb, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I was wearing a wire, its cold metal a small, uncomfortable secret against my skin. Minjun's men were ghosts in the rafters and shadows, invisible and silent. Harding arrived not with backup, but with 4 large, brutal-looking men, confirming he was no cop. Dante was with them, his face a mask of smug triumph. I told you she'd break, Dante sneered at Harding. Harding ignored him, his fake friendly smile firmly in place. Chloe, you made the right choice, he said, stepping into the light. Now, where are the records? They're in the office in the back, I said, my voice shaking. But first, you have to promise me I'm safe, Harding chuckled. Of course. You have my word. As his men started to move past me towards the office, I saw Dante's eyes fix on me, a predatory glint in them. This wasn't part of the plan. He lunged, grabbing my arm. You're coming with us, he hissed. You're my ticket. In that instant, the world exploded into controlled chaos.
Minun's men descended, appearing from nowhere.
The sounds of conflict were sharp and brutal. Amid the mayhem, Dante dragged me back, pulling a knife. Stay back, he screamed, holding the blade to my throat. She's mine. Suddenly, Minjun was there, moving through the fight like a wraith. His focus was entirely on me, on the knife at my throat. His eyes met mine over Dante's shoulder, and for a split second, I saw something raw and unguarded. Fear.
He didn't speak.
He simply acted. There was a blur of motion, a sickening crack, and Dante's grip on me went slack. He crumpled to the ground, his eyes wide with a final, terminal surprise. Minjun pulled me away from the body, his arms wrapping around me, shielding me from the violent tableau as his men finished their work with ruthless precision. The aftermath was silent, save for the dripping of water from the warehouse ceiling. The fight had been over in less than a minute. Minjun's men were efficient, professional, and utterly merciless. They cleaned the scene with a practiced speed that was more terrifying than the violence itself. Within minutes, there was no sign that Harding, Dante, or their men had ever existed. Minjun held onto me for a long moment, his arms a steel cage around my body, his chin resting on the top of my head. I was trembling uncontrollably, the adrenaline and terror finally crashing over me. He didn't say anything, just held me until the shaking subsided. Back at the penthouse, the silence was heavy and profound. The transactional nature of our arrangement had been shattered in that warehouse. I had willingly walked into the fire for him, and he had killed to protect me. The lines of our deal were now hopelessly blurred. He poured me a glass of water, his hands surprisingly gentle. He had a dark bruise forming on his jaw, the only visible sign of the fight. He finally broke the silence. The threat is gone, he said, his voice soft. The Kuznetsovs will understand this message. You are free to go. I will provide you with enough money to start a new life anywhere you choose. No one will ever bother you again. He was offering me the very thing Harding had promised, but this time it was real. Freedom. A clean slate. I looked at him, at this powerful, cold-blooded mafia boss who had saved me, used me, and ultimately risked himself for me. The thought of leaving, of walking away into a life where he didn't exist, felt like an amputation. The scared girl from the casino was gone, and I didn't know who I was without the shadow of his world. I don't want your money, I said, my voice stronger than I expected. He looked at me, his expression unreadable. What do you want, Chloe? I took a breath, meeting his intense gaze. I want a new deal, I said. No more secrets. No more performances. I don't want to be your pawn, or your pretty distraction. If I stay as a partner. A long silence stretched between us. He studied my face, searching for something. My life will always be dangerous, he warned. I know, I said. I'm not afraid anymore. A flicker of a smile, real and almost tender, touched his lips. The terms are acceptable. Months later, the city felt different. Min-jun's position as the undisputed head of his organization was solidified. His enemies were silent. He had begun to pivot his family's interests, investing in legitimate enterprises, building a facade of respectability over their dark foundation. I was always by his side. We were attending the opening of a new art gallery his company now sponsored. I wore a simple black dress, no longer feeling like I was in costume. People approached us with a deference that was still startling. An older gentleman, a city councilman, shook Min-jun's hand. Your partner is quite the asset, the man said, smiling at me. I've heard the stories. They're calling her the woman who saved the family. I felt Min-jun's hand find mine under the table, his fingers lacing through my own. It wasn't a public display of ownership or a practiced gesture for an audience. It was a quiet, private promise. A confirmation of our new, dangerous, and irrevocably real partnership.